The WHO notice is in. The Hondius outbreak is formally closed. So let's be precise about what that word actually means. If you're just joining us, the MV Hondius cluster was an Andes strain hantavirus outbreak tied to a cruise ship. 13 illnesses, 3 deaths. It triggered quarantine and monitoring across multiple countries. Passengers and crew finished a 42-day window. The final U.S. group was released in Nebraska, and U.S. monitoring ended with no confirmed U.S. case.
This is Hantavirus Watch. WHO finally gave us the all clear. So today, did that closure actually reach the people who needed it? And why were countries still chasing passengers who'd already flown home?
Medindia's Colleen Fleiss is tracking this. The formal notice is here. WHO has ended the MV Hondius outbreak, the Andes-virus cluster that reached 13 illnesses and 3 deaths across several countries. And I want to be precise about what that means. I'm talking about WHO's own end-of-outbreak designation, the actual document, rather than a country statement or someone else's paraphrase.
So the clock didn't just quietly run out. Somebody actually said so. That's what I wanted all week. A benchmark, not a vibe.
Right. And process-wise, that closure only comes after the traced contacts clear quarantine and monitoring. The all clear comes from the tracing. It doesn't replace it.
Which is a cleaner answer than the Medindia write-up gives you if you only skim the headline. Outbreak over reads like a finish line, but the closure math actually lines up with that 6-week incubation ceiling landing in early July. Okay, so WHO just announced the Hondius outbreak is officially over, but we were also reporting on countries scrambling to track down passengers weeks ago. If it's over, what was all that contact tracing actually for?
Those two things actually fit together. The tracing is what gave WHO the all clear. The MV Hondius sailed from Argentina on April 1st, and more than 30 people got off at a South Atlantic stop roughly 2 weeks before the outbreak was even detected. So health authorities on 4 continents were chasing 2 groups at once: people who got sick on the ship and people who'd already scattered home before anyone knew there was a problem. Al Jazeera, reporting on the WHO declaration, says the outbreak ultimately infected 13 people and killed 3, and that it involved the Andes strain. That's important because, unlike most hantavirus strains, Andes can spread person to person, not just from rodents. CBC News made the same point. This contact tracing differed from a typical rodent exposure investigation, and WHO's Director General set a clear endpoint. The outbreak could be declared over only after the last identified contact of an exposed person finished quarantine, tested negative, and went home. In the U.S., per the Associated Press, that meant 8 Americans spent 42 days in a specialized quarantine unit in Nebraska before being cleared.
So the 42-day quarantine for those Americans, that's an unusually long time. Why so long compared to, say, a 2-week COVID quarantine?
Because Andes strain hantavirus can be severe, and because human-to-human spread, while rare, is documented, officials didn't want to leave much gap there. Once the Nebraska patients completed the 42 days, tested negative, and were released, WHO had what it needed to draw the line. Next, the sequencing work, including genome analysis at a lab in Dakar, Senegal, is what may tell investigators how this cluster started and whether ship-based exposures need new protocols. From Sarah Cherry at the Journal of Experimental Medicine.
Hantavirus disease illustrates the complexity of infectious diseases and puts spotlight on the need to understand the processes driving pathology and those that can prevent or mitigate disease. This viewpoint argues that improved treatments of viral diseases will require a combination of pathogenesis-guided strategies addressing the different phases of disease, including viral replication, tissue dysfunction, and damaging immune amplification.
So the same week WHO closes the Hondius outbreak, this Aarhus review lands in the Journal of Experimental Medicine saying, hey, we still don't have a treatment that targets how this disease actually hurts people. Outbreak over, treatment shelf empty. Those are two separate facts, and I want listeners to hear both.
Right, and this is peer-reviewed, with Sarah Cherry's name on it, a review in GEM. That carries more weight than the drug repurposing screen headlines that ran in late June. Their argument is pretty specific. You'd need to hit different phases separately. Viral replication, then the tissue dysfunction, then the immune overreaction that does a lot of the damage. One drug isn't going to cover all three.
And here's what nags me. The WHO all clear is the moment the research money starts drifting somewhere else. This paper's basically flagging the gap right as the spotlight moves on.
That's the tension. The cruise ship chapter closes, the clinical reality that defined it, no pathogenesis-guided therapy on the shelf, is still sitting there.
If you have feedback, story ideas, or a correction for Hantavirus Watch, send us a note anytime at hantaviruswatch@lanternpodcasts.com. We're always listening for what needs a closer look. You'll find links to every story we covered today in the show notes, so if one caught your ear, you can read further there. That's Hantavirus Watch for today. This is a Lantern podcast.